Hey guys, it's Ray here. Welcome to Interrupting Sports, the show devoted to inspiring positive change. This is Season 1, Episode 6, and today I'm excited to take a different approach to the podcast today and look at history in sport. So today we're going to talk about why basketball is so black. Without even running the numbers, it doesn't take a genius to tell you that it is abundantly clear that a significant portion of the basketball population is black. But I did run the numbers, and it turns out that as of 2020, just over 74% of NBA players identify as black. Ask any fan to name the top NBA players of all time, and you'll hear names like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and LeBron James before they name Larry Bird. You'll still hear the name Larry Bird, but his name will follow the rest. As a black kid, the first thing you are asked by literally anyone, BIPOC members, whites included, is do you play basketball or do you run track? Every black kid gets this question at least once in their lives. So let's break down the problem here. First of all, not only do people assume you play basketball or run track, they assume you're an athlete in the first place. It's like meeting a black person who can't dance. People don't understand what to do with that. They're like, what do you mean you can't dance? That doesn't make sense. To many, it doesn't make sense if you're black and you can't play sports. So after basketball and track, I'd say the next assumed sport after that is football. The last thing they'd expect from you to say is hockey, given that, as I mentioned in episode 3, Hockey for Everyone, when it comes to hockey, the ice is in fact white. So as a former black female hockey player myself, I'm definitely an outlier here. Personally, I remember being in school and my teachers would be shocked that I played hockey. At least for me, they were shocked in a good way. It was more of a, wow, okay, good for you response, rather than a, really, you play hockey reaction? So I found it kind of cool that I stood out from the norm because it made me feel unique. But now going back to this athlete stereotype and the implication with the black community. At this point, you're probably wondering why we make these assumptions in the first place. Why do we assume black people are athletes? And why do we assume sports like basketball, football, track and field? These assumptions stem from our society's habit of attribution bias. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the term attribution bias, what it is it's when people infer that a person's behavior is due to situational factors. So what I'm getting at here is that people jump to these conclusions, these athlete stereotypes, because they assume that all peas are from the same pod. All black people are from the same pod. So somehow we're part of this pod because of the color of our skin, which means that we are all athletic. So what this means is that we collectively make assumptions about one another, which allows us to develop these stereotypes in the first place. So over time, society has made assumptions about black people and athleticism so many times that we unconsciously develop the stereotype that black people are natural athletes. I guarantee every one of you listeners has witnessed a time where someone pointed out a sports team and said something like, "Aw man, they got a black guy, we gotta watch out for that." When they say watch out, what they mean is they are intimidated by his or her athletic ability, not because they know their stats or seen them play before, but simply because they're black, they assume that they're gonna be really good. So where do these assumptions come from? Well, these assumptions of athletic performance all tie back to the notion of something called black athletic superiority, which is a theory that states that black people possess certain traits that are acquired by genetics and by the environment in which they live, which allows them to excel over other races in athletic competition. So basically, the belief is that if you have black ancestors, then you're elite at sports, given that the situations that they face in their lives helped form some sort of genetic mutation to allow them to perform better. All that means is it's code for slavery. So to be frank, the theory is that due to genetics stemming from our enslaved ancestors, we are now genetically modified to excel in sports. So let's look deeper into these situational factors, which supposedly make Black people natural athletes. About a decade ago, the Journal of Black Studies published a research article which analyzed the perception of sport socialization from the intercollegiate athlete's perspective. So what they discovered is that an elevated level of sports socialization in the family, neighborhood, and media exists within the African American community. And the implication here is that it is this sports socialization which creates an overrepresentation in African American males in certain sports. So basically what they're saying is because of the environment in which African Americans live, the community that they're surrounded in, they are creating an environment where overrepresentation of their people present themselves in certain sports because they're all pursuing the same opportunities. And what that is that opportunity? It's basketball. So for there to be an elevated level of socialization, what that means is that there needs to be people in a child's life, so a Black child's life, such as their parents and other role models, that influence this participation in sports. So they're pushing them into sports, and in particular, certain sports, such as basketball. So when everyone in the neighborhood is playing ball, and the successful athletes in the media are too, naturally, a Black kid is pushed to basketball. In fact, what I found very interesting in this research is that compared to whites, African American males are deliberately socialized to basketball by limiting their exposure to other hobbies because the intention is to push sports as a possible career path. So what's happening here is not only are Black males pushed to sport, but they're pushed to basketball with the hopes of turning that into a professional career. So in fact, the research on the study concluded that 75% of respondents in this study identified African American athletes as their role models. So no wonder they have some dream to follow. So it's because this belief of becoming a pro athlete was so intensely enforced on the Black community, it became a version of the American dream for the Black male. So this is what directly contributed to the overrepresentation of African American males in basketball. So many of them are chasing the same dream and naturally being pushed into these opportunities and not allowing them exposure to other hobbies because they are believing that this is truly a way to become a successful athlete is through basketball. Okay guys, so it's a new month, which means that this month we'll be having the second blog post come out on Interrupting Sports website. So you can check out interruptingsports.com, and later this month you'll see blog post number 2 coming out, and you can definitely check that out. For you guys to remember, so that you don't have to check out the website every single time, you can subscribe to our newsletter on interruptingsports.com and stay up to date on all things Interrupting Sports, so you'll receive the latest podcast episodes as well as the blog posts right to your inbox, and you won't have to give it another thought. So head to our website, scroll down to the footer, enter your name and email, and subscribe now. And stay tuned for blog post number 2. So why do we care about overrepresentation of Black athletes in basketball? After all, aren't they underrepresented everywhere else? The reason I'm so intrigued by this topic is because when I titled this episode, Basketball is Black, I wasn't just speaking to the number of Black athletes in the game. I was also referring to the development of Black culture and identity to the game of basketball. The most significant element of Black culture that is now part of the game of basketball is hip-hop. Elements of hip hop culture have heavily influenced the game, from everything from fashion to storytelling. On the fashion standpoint, we look at the NBA as being one of the most influenced leagues by fashion. So it's because of the dominant black population in the NBA. I mentioned the 74% earlier in this episode. Out of all major sports, fashion has the strongest influence on basketball. This, once again, all goes back to history. Over time, as Black people, we have increasingly valued experiencing and expressing ourselves through our physical appearance in hopes of rebelling against the trends and expectations to dress and appear as white people. The most notable example in Black culture is the Black female who wears her natural afro with pride over wearing a wig with pin straight hair. What once was called nappy hair is now portrayed as a crown that should be appreciated for its natural beauty. So shout out to all my Black queens out there, wear your crown with pride. When it comes to Black culture and talking about wearing your natural hair as a Black female and a Black female athlete, I just wanted to drop in my own personal story here, because that is something that every Black female struggles with, athlete or not. It's embracing your natural hair, regardless of it being accepted by society. It's learning to accept it yourself and love yourself for it, because it is traditionally not accepted in society. And it's very unfortunate to see that. You see constantly countless Black women changing their appearance so that they're accepted at work and by their colleagues, or they feel more comfortable because they are appearing as white people as much as they can, rather than embracing their African roots and their natural beauty. And so it definitely breaks my heart when I talk about this, because I know every Black female can relate to the struggling with this. But the reason I'm mentioning this is when it comes to sport, there's also sort of an added layer to this, because it has to do with performance as well. Like for me, I always had braids in my hair because that's what I needed to take care of my hair and play hockey so that it could fit under a helmet, and it was just easier for me. But with that, I got so comfortable not wearing my hair as an afro that when the time came when I retired, it wasn't until then that I really embraced my natural hair, and that's what I wear today, on and off from braids and my natural hair. But I'm really mentioning this because this is a prime example of why elements of hip hop and Black culture come into play to go against and to challenge and to rebel against these trends that have been putting Black people in a box that is far from who they are. So the NBA, and it's the Black people that make up the NBA, by incorporating that hip hop culture, they're allowing us as in Black people, to use that platform to show the world who we are. And that is why it's so influential. And now we're seeing that develop in other sports as well. I mentioned that other sports that are assumed to be played or participated by Black individuals as track and field and football. So you're seeing that culture emerge as well. Whereas you see a sport like hockey, which is definitely far from it, as I mentioned in episode 3. However, the point is here that it's important for us to recognize that it's not just about representation in the sport, overrepresentation, underrepresentation, appropriate representation. It's also about what that representation brings. So in basketball, that brings elements of Black culture into the sport, which affects not only the players, the coaches, the brands, but it also affects the fans and how we view the sport as a whole. And then in sports like hockey, we see that straight away, we see more of elements of white sort of culture and elements of their lifestyle that are more significantly demonstrated in that sport versus elements of other cultures, not just Black people. The point is, on this front, is that Black people want to look good in public, and they do that through self-expression, using clothing. So what this means is that with hip-hop culture being sort of the medium that sets the stage for African American fashion trends, NBA players are shown in the media reinforcing these fashion trends, which promotes the hip-hop culture in basketball. Okay, so I've covered a lot today, so I want to recap my point for you and ensure that you catch my drift. My point here is that basketball is Black for the following reasons. 1. Because society has reinforced a stereotype that Blacks are natural athletes due to the fact that it is believed that our enslaved ancestors have genetically modified us to have an athletic advantage, that has ultimately socialized Black people to sports. What that means is that has automatically pushed Black people to look at sports as an opportunity for them to pursue their athletic abilities and dreams. That has then developed overrepresentation of Black males in certain sports. So because of overrepresentation of Black males in certain sports, namely basketball, due to this mentality that becoming a pro athlete is a feasible way for Black males to make a name for themselves, that has also contributed to basketball being Black. And finally, the increased socialization of sport in Black communities, that is what has allowed Black culture to heavily influence the game of basketball, with fashion being the most influential element of Black culture, shaping the sports, as we see NBA players, fans, coaches, all leveraging hip-hop fashion within their NBA careers. All right, guys, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you for taking the time to tune in. Please show some love to your favorite podcast by following us on Instagram at Interrupting Sports. I'll leave you guys today with a new message. Let's embrace diversity and welcome culture into sport. Thanks, guys, and see you next week.